you don't like will get you. And who's going to be most susceptible to paying attention to the snake? And that's going to be Eve. And the reason for that is Eve has offspring. And there's nothing tastier to a snake than a child. And so Eve had every reason to be self-conscious and neurotic. And women are more self-conscious and neurotic than men by quite a substantial amount. And that's true cross-culturally, and it emerges at puberty. And part of the reason is, as far as we can tell, is that women are more sexually vulnerable. They're also smaller. So that's a problem if you're engaged in any physical alteration. But most importantly, I think, is that why would you ever assume that a human female's nervous system is adapted to her or her well-being? Why wouldn't you assume instead that her nervous system is adapted to the female infant dyad? Because if it isn't, then the infants die. And so you might think, well, women are way more susceptible to depression and anxiety than men are. And that's a hell of a burden to bear. And that's also true cross-culturally, by the way. And it also kicks in at puberty. And the biggest differences are in Scandinavia, for those of you who think it's sociocultural, which it isn't. So, but there's reasons for it, you know, and it's also at puberty when men and women start to become sexually dimorphic in terms of size, and men are way more powerful in their upper bodies. It's incomparably more powerful. And so that makes them a lot more dangerous. And the primary human defense mechanism is punching, like with kangaroos. Because there's some other animals that punch. Chimps can punch too, but human beings, it's a punch. And most of the force in that is upper body and shoulder. And so a woman's no match for a man in a fight. And so she has every reason to be nervous, especially when you add to that her additional sexual vulnerability and the fact that she has to take care of extraordinarily dependent infants who are extremely fragile for a very long period of time. And so she had and women are more self-conscious than men. The empirical literature on that is clear. It's associated with trait neuroticism because self-consciousness is actually an unpleasant emotion. Who wants to be self-conscious? If I'm self-conscious on the stage talking to you, then all of a sudden I can't even talk to you. All I'm doing is thinking about me and all the things that are wrong with me, and I fall inside myself. It's like self-consciousness, although it's a great gift, let's say, is nothing pleasant. It's associated primarily with anxiety. So Eve had every reason to pay attention to the snake, that's for sure. I think I read this week that among, I can't remember which tribesmen it was, unfortunately, although I did put a footnote in my new book about this. These were jungle-dwelling tribal people. 5% of the adults had been attacked by a python, and a substantial number of children had been killed by them. So snake predation was no joke. It shaped our evolutionary past, and still is no joke in many places. And so we're attuned to snakes. And the thing is, as Lynn Hesbell pointed out, an anthropologist, we are really good at detecting the camouflage patterns of snakes, especially in the lower half of our visual field. And there's evidence that part of the reason that human beings have such acute vision, which means that our eyes opened, let's say, is because we co-evolved with snakes and we learned how to see them. And then the price we paid for seeing was that our brain grew, because you need a lot of brain to be able to see. And the consequence of our brain growing is one day we woke up and discovered the future. And the future is where all the snakes might live instead of where they live right now. So there's that. The same thing, and the same, so interesting, again, these images, you see, in this one, you have the specter of death in the tree with the snake and the fruit. Now, fruit is interesting too. I already made the case that there's a tight linkage between what you eat and information, right? A conceptual link as well as a practical link. But it's also the case that we can see colors. And the question is, why? And the answer is because we evolved to see ripe fruit. So in the story of Adam and Eve, human beings are given vision by the snake and the fruit. And that turns out to be correct. So isn't that something?